My World My Way was developed by Global A Entertainment and published by Atlas. It was released for the Nintendo DS in 2008 and for the PlayStation Portable in 2009. And until a few days ago, I had never played it, but that shouldn't surprise you. In my previous video, I played Spyro the Dragon, a game that sold over 4 million copies, had several sequels, and is still beloved by many to this day. For this video, I deliberately chose to highlight a game with a much smaller legacy. I honestly don't remember where I first heard about this one, but I've had a copy of the DS version sitting on my shelf since 2013. I always thought that I would like it, but I never sat down and just played it until now. My 3DS is modified for video output, so I used that in order to capture my footage. My World My Way began by telling me that I am a young lady from a royal family, that I'm cute, rich, and self-absorbed, and that all I'm missing is a dashing, romantic, wonderful boyfriend. Well, I knew all of that already. When are we going to start talking about the video game? My father agreed to hold a ball to attract potential suitors, but none of them were to my liking until a cute boy wearing blue arrived. Surprisingly, he told me that he was not a prince, but an adventurer. I became surrounded with hearts and stars, and then I decided to cut to the chase and propose already. But to my absolute shock, he rejected me. I couldn't believe it. He even called me cringe. He dared me to put away my fancy dress and experience the life of an adventurer for myself before approaching him again. I was astonished that anyone would speak to me this way, but I decided to swallow my pride and take him up on his challenge. I could tell right away that I was going to love this princess. Her characterization in this opening scene is extremely charming, and the way that it's written in second person made it extra fun. My favorite detail is how she doesn't even bother to learn the adventurer's name or really anything about him. Speaking of names, the next thing that the game did was ask me to name my princess. I thought that it might be fun to name her after myself, but I was only given 5 characters to work with, so I decided to go with the default name, Elise. I think she's the first princess in a video game to have that name. The first place that I went was Grasstown, where the mayor gave me a quest to defeat 5 war cats in the nearby forest. I bought a bow and a shield from the local armorer and spent my remaining money on potions. My first couple of battles were against some bugs outside of town. I didn't have any magic or other abilities yet, but they were weak enough to be defeated with 1 attack. After 3 of these battles, I had enough XP to level up. I love Elisa's happy sprite on the level up screen so much. Leveling up doesn't heal you in this game, so I returned to town and rested in the inn. Inns don't cost money, instead they make their profit from upselling you meals. Food can be used to increase your stats, but it's very expensive at this stage, so there were many nights that I went to sleep on an empty stomach. When I arrived in the forest, I met an owl who told me that there was a problem with my quest. I had been asked to defeat 5 war cats, but this forest only had 1 war cat in it. The owl explained that if there were more forests, I could find more war cats. The owl gave Elise 5 pout points and suggested that I try using them by pouting about the terrain. Elise wasn't satisfied with a normal forest though and demanded a dancing one, which she promptly received. I tried fighting a war cat in the new forest, but I was outmatched. When Elise falls in battle, you have the choice of losing either half of your experience or half of your money. You can also choose to lose neither, but that costs more pout points than I'll have for a while. I probably could have defeated the war cat using items. The game started me with 1 holy missile, 2 fire missiles, and 3 fire bombs, but I didn't have the money to replace those once I had used them, so I decided to grind for another level instead. It only took 1 more battle to reach level 3. That level made all the difference, and I was able to defeat the 5 war cats I needed. It also helped that I was using the ability Ladies First, which lets you spend 2 pout points at the start of battle to guarantee that Elise goes first. I turned in the quest to the mayor and received a key. What I, the player, knew that Elise didn't, is that the mayor was actually an actor working for Nero. Nero is a warrior hired by Elise's father to secretly follow her on her adventure and protect her. He'll spend the rest of the game watching Elise from behind various terrain just out of sight, and setting up quests like this one in hopes that her whim for adventure can be satisfied without putting her in any actual danger. After leaving Grasstown, I had the choice of going to either Farm Town or Grave Town. Farm Town sounded safer, so I started there. It was there that Elise was reunited with her pet parrot, Perrault. Nero explained to the player that Perrault can use magic, but that it'll cost Elise's MP to do so. Perrault only knew the spell Heal for now, but he can learn new spells if Elise is hit with them enough times in battle, sort of like blue magic from Final Fantasy. The mayor here asked me to defeat 5 tater bombs and collect 5 mountain grapes. The forests in this area contained mountain grapes, but they also contained wizard mandrills who were too strong for me. I learned that if you flee from battle, the game returns you to the town square. Neat. The forest seemed dangerous, so I checked out the prairies instead. I ran into my owl friend, who recommended using firebomb items against the tater bomb monster, so I loosened up and started using items more. When I hit level 5, Perot learned the spell Magic Arrow. I learned this from being hit with it when fighting wizard drills. Magic Arrow was significantly stronger than Elise's normal attack, so it became my main way of dealing damage. Every time Perot learns a new spell, he makes a cute sound. After my quest was complete, I was asked to make a choice as Nero. He wanted to challenge Elise at the gate leading out of town, and I got to choose how strong of a monster would do the task. Naturally, I picked a tough monster. The tough monster turned out to be a stray goblin who Elise heartlessly said only existed to give her experience points. I lost my fight against it after Elise got stunned and I wasn't able to do anything. But I tried again and I was able to win with the help of a couple of ice bombs. I got the goblin's club as a new weapon, but my game plan revolved mostly around using magic arrows and bomb items at this point, so my weapon didn't matter very much. Next, I went to Gravetown, where I got to see this extremely cute sprite of Elise and Perot looking excited for the first time. The quest here is very similar to the one in Farmtown, but with a bone fighter and cough grass instead of tater bombs and mountain grapes. The owl taught Perot a spell called Holy Sword, which can be used to make Elise's normal attack deal holy damage in order to be more effective against the skeleton. However, even with Holy Sword active, Magic Arrow's damage was much higher, so I used that. If I had come to Gravetown before going to Farmtown, I wouldn't have had Magic Arrow, so it would have been a more difficult fight. After defeating the Bone Fighter, I got its sword. The sword had a heightened critical hit chance, unlike the club that I got before, which had a chance of stunning. I really like how the game differentiates weapons from each other by giving them different effects like this. By the way, before I could find the Bone Fighter, I had to pout in order to make more graveyards. Look at how adorable the graveyards that Elise makes are. They're filled with cartoon ghosts and prop bats, just like how graveyards are in her imagination. The little details like this really add a lot of personality. Nero again gave me the choice of 2 gate monsters for Elise to fight. The one I picked this time turned out to be a cute ghost with bells on. It was able to deal nearly Elise's entire HP in one hit with an attack called Angelic Chop, but I hit it with the Holy Missile that I started the game with and absolutely obliterated the poor thing. I then went to Flower Town, but along the way, I met my second party member, a slime with the ability to mimic monsters. Elise named this slime Pinky. It turned out that Pinky was put there by Nero for her to find. Nero said that pink slimes are rare, but he knew that the slime needed to be pretty to attract Elise's attention. In my first battle with Pinky at my side, I fought a forked cat, which was an enemy that could heal itself faster than I could damage it. Pinky didn't know any magic yet, but they could use items, so I returned to town and stocked up on bombs and missiles. Working together, Elise and Pinky were able to defeat the forked cats. It's interesting to see a turn-based RPG built around a party size of 2. I can't think of any other games that do this. At least, not any that don't star Super Mario. After battle, the game gave me the option to have Pinky mimic the forked cat, gaining 10 wisdom and the ability to wear helmets. Cool. I gave Pinky a cute ribbon to wear. A little later, Pinky gained some speed from mimicking a grass bug. This system of transforming Pinky into different forms based on the monsters that you defeat reminds me a lot of how monsters work in the early Saga games. I checked Pinky's status and found out that they can mimic up to 4 monsters at once, 1 body part from each. I had found a head and legs so far. This system was one of the most fun aspects of the game for me. Before I could leave Flower Town, I needed to defeat the gatekeeper Lone Warrior, who's one of those guys who only knows how to communicate by quoting movies. When we cut back to Nero, I met a new character, Kate the Dungeon Digger. Elise had heard rumor of a powerful monster called the Succubus Queen, and she had her little heart set on fighting this monster. She missed the part of the story where the Succubus Queen had already been defeated by Nero, so Nero hired Kate to build a dungeon in hopes of attracting a new Succubus Queen for Elise to fight. In this scene, Nero refers to Elise as his apprentice, which is sweet of him. By the way, Kate and her brother Owen, who is also a minor character in this game, are apparently the 2 protagonists from an earlier game called Master of the Monster Lair, which is a part of a series called Dungeon Maker. I had never heard of Global A Entertainment or any of their other games prior to doing research for this video, but I'm kind of interested in checking more of them out now. Aside from these dungeon games, they've also made some sim games like Cosmetic Paradise and Happy My Sweets. These games look extremely cute. Unfortunately, I don't think GAE is around anymore. The most recent information that I could find about the company was from 2018, when they made a mobile game for the idol group AKB48. Most of GAE's games were on either the DS or the PSP, and portable game platforms like those don't exist anymore. There's nowhere left for games like My World, My Way to go, and that's sad. I was entirely expecting dungeons to work the same way as overworld areas, so I was shocked to find that they have full 8-directional movement. There are some other differences too, like the locations of enemy monsters are visible, and you can't use the return spell to teleport back to town. I encountered my first succubus, and I was pleasantly surprised by how tasteful her design was. After the battle, Pinky mimicked her, gaining a bunch of HP and defense. By the end of the dungeon, Pinky's loadout was Succubus, Bone Fighter, Succubus, Succubus. You've had a lot of succubi here. Pinky wasn't the only one to benefit from fighting all these monsters. Perot learned the Fireball spell after seeing a succubus hit Elise with it a bunch. Enemies in dungeons sometimes drop iron, silver, or gold keys, which can then be used to open corresponding chests elsewhere in the dungeon. The keys and chests respawn each day, so you can collect these rewards multiple times. Some chests have randomized contents, but most don't. Every monster in the dungeon also respawns when you rest, which can make the early parts of the dungeon feel repetitive after a while. Luckily, Elise has a pout power that allows you to weaken monsters. After you use it, the next group of enemies will have their levels reduced by 10, and then the levels gradually return to normal each fight after that. This power is essential for exploring dungeons as it lets you breeze through the early fights while saving your resources for the later ones. After over an hour of dungeon delving, I at last met the Succubus Queen. Elise explained that she would get a boyfriend by defeating her, but the Queen was unable to follow Elise's logic. It's so simple really, what's there to be confused about? The Succubus Queen had an enormous 200 HP, and she posed like she was doing an Ojo-sama laugh. My first attempt didn't go very well, but the game very kindly lets you run away from bosses. I love when games let you do this. While regrouping, Perot learned Fire Curtain, a spell that the Queen had been using on me. It's cool that you're able to learn spells before you've even defeated the enemy that you're learning them from. Third time was the charm for the Succubus Queen fight, as I got lucky, and she used more single targeting attacks than she had in earlier fights, meaning that I had to spend fewer of my turns healing. After the fight was done, Elise returned home and we got to see her wearing a new fancy dress, now with her short hair. She throws another party, but for some reason, the adventurer still wants nothing to do with her. He's not impressed by her accomplishments at all, calling her an amateur and then ditching her to go to another party. The nerve of this guy, how dare he? And so, Elise takes Perot and Pinky and heads out on a new adventure. Surely I'll be able to impress my future boyfriend this time. By now, you've probably caught on to the basic gameplay loop. You arrive in a new town and get a quest to accomplish in the vicinity, doing some combination of fighting monsters and gathering items. Sometimes you need to use pouting to change the terrain in order to find what you're looking for. Once the quest is complete, you get the key needed to move on, but before you can do that, you fight your choice of 2 gatekeepers. Then you go to the next town and you do it again. All the while, you're collecting new equipment for Elise, new spells for Perot, and new monster parts for Pinky. After every few towns, there's a big dungeon with a main boss at the end. A lot of portable games from this era, especially in Japan, were designed around a 20-minute or so loop. This was so that players could experience a meaningful chunk of the video game while on the train to work or school. My World, My Way definitely feels like it's paced around that context, especially in between dungeons. The second region of the game is called Desert Land. There were a lot of new monsters here, including war dogs, pirates, and my personal favorite, catbirds. Starting here, many towns had side quests. For example, a shopkeeper in Port Town wanted me to find an earring that her boyfriend gave her. Nearby, there was a small optional dungeon where I found the stolen earring inside a locked chest. When I returned to the shopkeeper, she gave me a special ring for my trouble. The gate bosses that I fought here were the Lone Witch, Flame Slime, Fire Warrior, and Fire Witch. I realized somewhere in here that the pout powers that allow you to double the money and experience you earn work on these gate monsters, so they became huge paydays for me going forward. The final dungeon of Desert Land is the Queen Elf's Castle. There were elf monsters here who were aligned with each of the 3 elements of magic: holy, fire, and ice. After fighting these elves for a while, Perot was able to learn spells that deal holy and ice damage. This was especially vital because there was no item shop in the town here to replenish my stock of bombs, and you're not allowed to leave a town until you've completed the main quest there. The boss at the top of the castle was the Queen Elf herself. The Queen Elf believes that humans exist to give her experience points, which is the same thing that Elise believes about monsters. The two were unable to reconcile their beliefs and the battle began. A side quest in the area rewarded me with the Holy Barrier spell to help protect me from her attacks, but even with it, my healing couldn't keep up with the damage that she was dealing. After a couple of attempts, I decided that I needed to grind more before I would be able to win. While doing so, I discovered that there were monsters here that were able to drop holy-resistant equipment like the fairy ring and the fairy shoes. With the help of my new gear, I was able to defeat the Queen Elf on my next try. Even with all of the extra holy defense though, it was still a long, intense fight since the damage that I was dealing to her was very low. I like that the game makes you fight the boss using the same set of resources that you use to explore the dungeon. I feel like this was already becoming old school by the time that this game came out, with most games giving you a full heal before a boss like this. In practice, however, you can use the pout power, This Is Annoying, to skip almost any normal battle for only 5 PP. As long as you take the most direct route through the dungeon, you'll have more than enough PP to get to the boss without fighting any other encounters. Of course, you'll still have to explore the dungeon to find that route, but once you do, it's not hard to get to the boss fully rested. Nero was abundantly proud of Elise's victory here, saying that she did a very good job. Elise was certain that her boyfriend would accept her this time, and surprisingly, Nero seemed to think so too. But again, the adventurer was unimpressed and said disparaging things about Elise's personality. Elise was heartbroken at first, but she awoke the next morning more determined than ever. And it seemed that she had begun to realize that she liked helping people. I'd like to take a moment here to talk about the title of this game. It was released in English as My World, My Way, but the original Japanese title is slightly different. It translates to something like, The World Revolves Around Me. Apparently, this change was done to avoid confusion with another DS game, namely Square Enix's The World Ends With You, which was released about a year earlier. Incidentally, The World Ends With You is also a localized title. Its Japanese title translates to something like It's a Wonderful World. If it had been released under that title in English, then maybe My World, My Way would have been called The World Revolves Around Me instead. Another thing that I want to say about the title regards this word here, atashi. The use of this word heavily implies that the speaker in the title is a young girl. In English, everyone uses the same first-person pronouns, so this information gets lost in translation. It's similar to how when you refer to Boku no Natsuyasumi as My Summer Vacation, you're losing the implication that the speaker is a young boy. In both cases, it's an important bit of the title's flavor that we can't easily reproduce in English while still speaking in first person. I should note that I don't claim to be fluent in Japanese, I'm very much not. I just find localization really interesting, and I have a lot of respect for the people who do it, even in situations like this where I like the original title a bit better than the English one. The third region was called Snowland. New monsters here included samurai wolves, their leader, the Shogun Wolf, war penguins, and otter wizards. The monster designs are good, and discovering new ones was one of the joys of the game. That's why I'm trying to include as many of my favorites as I can in this video. The gatekeepers I fought here were Rotten Pepper, Shroom Lizard, Saurus Rex, Donkey Wizard, Ice Witch, and Ice Warrior. The Donkey Wizard dropped an elixir, an item which heals both members of my party. In most games, getting a consumable item from a boss would be disappointing. In My World, My Way, however, this was an incredible reward. You see, anytime you acquire a new consumable item, it immediately appears in shops and becomes purchasable for the rest of the game. so that one elixir could be turned into as many elixirs as I needed. There's a similar system for gear, where once you sell a piece of equipment, you can buy it as many times as you want. These are both really smart features. I love how they completely remove any incentive to hoard items. I wish that more games would take this approach. The final dungeon of Snowland is called Country Fugue. Because this had been an ice-themed world, I had mostly been fighting monsters who were weak to fire. But this dungeon was full of ninjas who were not. The boss of Country Fugue was Foxwoman. She had a ton of HP, but I was able to win this one on my first try thanks to some help from my friends. Nero and Kate implied in a scene earlier that I would need to use pouting to lower the boss's level before I could beat her, so I did that. In another earlier scene, the owl taught Perot a spell called Clear that could remove buffs from enemies. That spell proved to be essential here. Rather than be unimpressed by Elise's accomplishment, this time the adventurer just plain disbelieved her. He said that he had his own eyes set on defeating the Foxwoman, prompting Elise to have the epiphany that she was now on the same level as him. So this time she set out with the goal of surpassing him, and becoming the strongest hero in history. This drive led her to the fourth and final region, Chaos Land. New monsters here included Valkyries, Demon Armors, Evil Hounds, and Werewolf Girls. The gatekeepers I fought were Centaur, Mammoth Troll, Forest Dragon, Fire Dragon, and Ice Dragon. Throughout this chapter, there were cutaways to the adventurer's perspective as he retraced Elise's steps through Snowland on his quest to fight a monster who he refused to believe had already been defeated. There were 2 smaller dungeons here that I was required to do before reaching the final one. Haunted Mansion is full of traps that you can disable by finding the corresponding switch elsewhere on the floor. Lost Ruins has a lot of slime monsters with incredibly high HP, but they're susceptible to the Weaken spell, which reduces an enemy's HP to 1. After completing those, there was a location called Evil Mountain. This was the first place where I had to consult a guide, specifically the guide by 3 times on game FAQs, to figure out what to do. I was looking for an item called an Evil Crest. If I walked around on these mountain tiles long enough, I would eventually find a fake Evil Crest called an Even Crest. Walking around on these tiles was time-consuming though, because there were these monsters there that couldn't be avoided by spending pout points, the way almost every other encounter in the game could be. Once I had picked up my 7th Even Crest, Elise gave up and pouted until it turned into the Evil Crest that I needed. Most of the required quests in the game are incredibly straightforward, so this more esoteric one was an unexpected curveball right before the final dungeon. Before we move on to that dungeon, let's take a step back for a moment and talk about some boxes. I'll start with the box for the North American Nintendo DS version, since that's the one that I own. It's a decent cover. I like the logo treatment with the stars and the globe, and I think the second line being italicized is a nice touch. Good colors on the logo too. But the character designs are clearly the main draw here. I don't remember why I originally bought this game, but I'd bet that seeing Elise's design had something to do with it. Though it's odd to me that Pinky or other party members nowhere to be seen. Also, I've always felt that the characters were too close in this image. It feels like Elise is right up in my face. So now let's compare with Japan's cover, and sure enough, we have the same piece of art but zoomed out. Not only can we see more of Elise's outfit now, but we can also see the top of her head thanks to the much better logo placement. Kate and the Adventurer are uncovered here as well. The one downside that I'd say this cover has over the North American one is that we can see more of the sky, which appears to just be taken from a stock photo. A more cartoony sky in line with the characters would have worked better for me. Next, let's take a look at the Japan-only PSP version. Here we have a brand new piece of art featuring the 4 characters from before, plus Pinky, and also 3 people I've never seen before. The PSP version of the game includes content that wasn't in the original DS release, so it makes sense that they would want to advertise this by prominently featuring some new characters on the cover. Elise is still pointing, as before, but they've taken her smug expression away and given it to the new pink-haired character, which is a change that I don't like. Nero looks less exasperated too. It seems like they felt the need to make the characters seem nicer so that they would be more marketable. This is still probably my favorite cover overall, but it's an unfair comparison because the taller shape of the PSP box affords a lot more space to show off the characters. Before we return to the game, I do want to quickly note here that the headline on the back of the North American box is The world revolves around me. So it's cool that they did manage to sneak the game's original title on there somewhere. Okay, back to the game. 20 years ago, Nero's father defeated a great villain called the Chaos Lord, but he lost his life in the process. Now, Kate has built a dungeon to summon Princess Chaos, the Chaos Lord's daughter. Nero was terrified of Princess Chaos because of the loss he had suffered before, so the task of defeating her fell to Elise, who had never been afraid of anything in her life except for being single. Things were getting serious. An eerie moon sat permanently in the sky above the final town. One of the townspeople confessed to Elise that they were all actors hired by Nero, but she didn't seem to care. Inside the dungeon, I found the recovery staff inside a chest. This is a weapon which heals both of your characters whenever it hits the enemy. Cool! Elise had been playing the role of healer for most of the game anyway, and now she could do that without consuming MP or items. It was a useful tool for a long 5-floor slog of a labyrinth, which just so happened to be exactly what I found myself traversing. I also found an item called the Lord's Belt. I had a side quest to bring this item to the armorer in town who claimed to possess the strongest sword in the game, the Lord's Blade. In exchange for the belt, he agreed to put the sword up for sale, but its price was exorbitant. Fortunately, a little later in the dungeon, I found a crisp 100,000 G bill, which covered half of the price by itself. I bought the blade and gave it to Pinky. Similar to the recovery staff casting Heal All on hit, the Lord's Blade, on top of its normal damage, casts Angelic Light, a spell that deals holy damage to all enemies. Now that both of my characters had their final weapons, it was time to take Princess Chaos to task. In a short conversation, Elise declared that she was fighting for love, and then the battle began. I knew that I would need to use the Reflect spell in this battle, because there was a very sad scene earlier in which the owl sacrificed his intelligence to teach it to us, becoming just a normal animal in the process. I started by having Elise cast that, first on herself and then on Pinky. Just after that, Princess Chaos used her ultimate attack, Chaotic Light, which has a pretty sick animation, and thanks to the reflects, it bounced back and hit her for about 1/10 of her HP. Reflect only works once, so on the next turn I had Elise cast it on Pinky again. But then Princess Chaos used Chaotic Light again and took down Elise in one shot. I had assumed, because it takes 2 turns to set up my reflects, that she wouldn't be allowed to use Chaotic Light twice in a row, but I was wrong and it was back to floor 1 for me. The climb from the dungeon entrance to the boss takes about 20 minutes, so each failure was incredibly punishing. My second attempt went even worse than the first, with Princess Chaos using Chaotic Light on turns 1 and 2 to take out Pinky, then finishing off Elise with her unreflectable physical attack, Chaotic Penalty. This was the second time that I consulted the game FAQs guide written by 3 times. This fight seemed impossible, so I knew that I must be missing something. It turned out that I was missing 2 very big somethings. The first was that there was a consumable item called a Magic Mirror that has the same effect as the Reflect spell, meaning that I could set up Reflect on both of my characters on the same turn. You get the Magic Mirror as a drop from a monster who appears on the 4th floor of this castle, so I once again made the climb up, I got the drop, and then I returned to town to buy more of them, as acquiring the first one made it available at the store. The second thing that I was missing was that the benefits of eating food are permanent. I had foolishly assumed, based on other video games, mostly ones released years after this one, that meals only affected your stats for the following day. But, of course, I had assumed wrong. And so I started grinding for money to buy some meals. My Elise's stats had probably been lower than the game expected for the entire playthrough because I had only eaten once or twice until now. But even if I had been eating food the whole time, food is really expensive. In that case, I would have still needed to grind for money here in order to afford the 200k Lord's Blade. And having the Lord's Blade made this grind go a lot faster than if I didn't have it. So I'm not actually sure what I did wrong, but I felt bad about it regardless. Eventually, I got enough money to eat 4 ultimate steaks, bringing Elise's max HP up to 300. Then I got one final level up, putting that total up to 304. I made the trek back to the boss, my stats higher and my pockets full of magic mirrors. This time, I was ready to kill Chaos. It was scary, but in the end I prevailed. I made one miscalculation right at the end, which left Pinky unprotected from a fatal Chaotic Light, but it didn't matter because Elise's Reflect did enough damage to take Princess Chaos out at the same time. For the final party of the story, Elise showed up wearing her adventuring outfit. The boy apologized to Elise for underestimating her and for being a jerk, but Elise told him that she's no longer interested. She called him boring. After that, Nero appeared before Elise for the first time. He humbly congratulated her, and then the credits began. I had been fearful that the game would romantically pair Elise and Nero at the end of the game. That would have been a fraught relationship for several reasons, some of which should be obvious even without playing the game. It's fine that they left it open for people to ship the two of them if they want to, but I like that the ending works even if you don't. I want to give a shout out to howlongtobeat.com, which is generally a fantastic resource, but which led me on this particular occasion to believe that this game would be under 25 hours long. I was already at 27 hours when I entered the final dungeon for the first time, and from there it would be 7 more hours before I would see the ending. Maybe by the time this video goes up, I'll have made an account on that website and brought up that average time. Length notwithstanding, I quite liked My World My Way. It's a pretty good dungeon crawler. It may not have the same depth as, say, Etrian Odyssey, which came out on the same platform a year earlier, but it's a lot more approachable. And it's not like this game is devoid of challenging battles or of interesting systems either. And of course, Elise is great. I love this bratty princess character archetype wherever it shows up, and I felt very pandered to getting a whole game where I get to play as one of these. I love how her personality informs the game both mechanically and aesthetically. And it's great to see her grow up and change over the course of her adventure. My biggest criticism is that this game felt very repetitive at times. However, it's important to remember that the way that I played it was not really what it was designed for. I played this game in multi-hour sessions, with my 3DS tethered to my PC so that I could capture the footage. If instead I had put my DS in my purse and played it 15 or 20 minutes at a time while on the go, I'm sure that I would have had a better time with it. But then, you wouldn't have this video. All in all, I had a fun time playing this game, and much more than this, I did it my way. Thank you so very much for watching, I do really appreciate it. There was a lot of game here to condense into a half-hour script, and it was difficult for me to decide what was worth talking about and what wasn't, but I did my best. I hope that I was able to communicate what it was like to play this game. For these first 2 videos, I wanted to play 2 games that were very different from one another. I chose this pairing because I wanted to give you an idea of the full breadth of video games that I'm interested in covering as this series develops. But now the time has come to rank these 2 games. Did I like My World My Way more than I liked Spyro the Dragon? In my entirely subjective opinion, these games are honestly pretty close. I enjoyed both of them a lot. Spyro has 2 major knocks against it. One is that I didn't like the music, and the other is that it contained some, let's say, tasteless imagery. On the other hand, My World My Way is just too long. If it had wrapped up the story and rolled the credits after Chapter 3, and then presented Chapter 4 as optional post-game content, I would have given it the number 1 slot easily. But as it stands, if you just want to reach the end of the story in this game, you're in for a lot of tedium. I went back and forth on this ranking a number of times, but ultimately I decided to follow my heart. And so congratulations to My World My Way, my new number 1. How long will it stay on top? Well, you'll just have to watch my future videos to find out. At the time that I'm recording this, the Spyro video hasn't gone live yet, so I can't be sure that anyone is watching. However, I'm enjoying making these videos so much that I think I'll continue regardless, at least for a little while. My plan for the 3rd video is to cover a certain game that was released in 1997 for the Nintendo 64. Let me know which one you think it'll be. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you then.